Just days before the first round of primaries in Virginia, Senator Tim Kaine hit the campaign trail to talk with constituents and support Democrats running in the state. There are 3 Republicans vying for his Senate seat. We caught up with Kaine at one of his campaign stops, and I got to ask him about his controversial opponents. Heading into a primary in Virginia on Tuesday, there are 3 Republicans running against you. All 3 of them have controversy for different reasons. One of them has been tied to white nationalists. Another one has been accused of making homophobic comments. So when we look at the actions of these candidates, what do you think that says about the state of the Republican Party going into the midterms?
Well, I think the Virginia, I can't describe the whole nation from the Virginia Party, but there are some similarities. I think the party is basically Donald Trump's party. They're all competing in Virginia to be Donald Trump's acolyte. They're all pretending like they'll be the best supporter of President Trump's agenda. So President Trump, who was not ever really a Republican before this race, he's completely captured the GOP, the party of Lincoln, and now it's Trump's party. And there's some differences between these 3, but they're all trying to compete to be Donald Trump's yes man.
One of those 3 candidates, Corey Stewart, who used to work for Donald Trump, he has been a very avid defender of Confederate statues. And this is something that's a really big issue in Virginia, particularly because Virginia was once the capital of the Confederacy. Right. So, when we think about the controversy surrounding that issue in Virginia particularly, how do you deal with that? How do we address that issue?
I've dealt with this throughout my career because I was the mayor of Richmond, and so Corey is a local elected official, and I was the mayor of Richmond. The city was the capital of the Confederacy, and we took some statues down, we took some bridges down, we put up some statues, we maintained and kept some statues. There was no one-size-fits-all answer, but what I learned in that capacity, and then continued it as lieutenant governor too, did some things with statues as lieutenant governor through now, is the quality of the listening that you do to your citizens will determine the acceptability of your outcome. So too much, do this, don't do that. We got to keep, when Corey goes to Charlottesville and says you should keep statues up, well, Charlottesville elects local officials, just like Prince William does. And the Charlottesville citizens are entitled to have some say in their city. So I generally say local officials or state officials, do the best listening that you can to what your constituents think. That will lead you to some creative solutions that may not be acceptable to everybody, but they'll be an awful lot better than if instead of listening you just say this is the way it's going to be. And the second piece of advice I always give, because a lot of mayors call and ask me for advice because I had dealt with this 20 years ago when I was mayor of Richmond. Remember, it's not just about subtraction. It's not just about what should come down. We put up a statue of Arthur Ashe, who was a great hero from Richmond. We built new bridges and named them after civil rights heroes. When we dedicated a new juvenile courthouse, we named it after a civil rights litigator and hero. Too many communities, there are names about a particular moment in time like the Civil War, but a whole lot of people whose stories have never been told who've done heroic things. They should be recognized. And I always give mayors and folks advice, like you have buildings like that'll be just called the county courthouse or the public utilities building. Look at all of the buildings you have. They're all opportunities to be named after somebody. There's so many opportunities where you can broaden the story. And so, I'm puzzled that Corey feels like he can go around and tell Charlottesville what Charlottesville needs to do or what some other cities need to do. These communities can engage in listening and make the right decisions for themselves. They don't need Corey Stewart telling them what to do. But as communities grapple with it, telling the full story of history is often important because usually they've just told too tiny a sliver of their histories.
President Trump this week is going to be meeting with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. Based on what we've seen from his sort of deal-making negotiation strategies before, what we've seen from him at the G7 summit, how do you think that negotiation is going to go?
Well, look, I'm glad he's doing it. I'm not one of these people that's like going to criticize the president on everything. I'm harshly critical of many things, like getting out of the Iran deal. But being willing to dialogue with North Korean leadership, I'm glad that he's willing to do it. I worry about, he hasn't had an ambassador to South Korea yet. He just sent a name over in the last few weeks, but I mean, it's 18 months into the administration. That's a key position to help prepare for something like this. So I don't necessarily think he's approaching it with the seriousness I wish he would, but look, if they get something good done, I'm going to say this is good for the country. Here's a worry I have. I worry a little bit that they may try to get a short-term good deal on the Korean Peninsula, but at the expense of declining U.S. presence in Asia generally. That would be very positive for China. If we get a short-term deal that's okay in the Korean Peninsula, but the expense is we broadly remove U.S. presence from the region, Japan will suffer, South Korea will suffer, Australia will suffer. Nations like Vietnam that want closer relationships with the United States to counter Chinese dominance, they will suffer. And so that's what I'm going to be watching for. And under any circumstance, I think the president will need to submit this deal to Congress for approval. I don't think he should be able to do it on his own. My Republican colleagues would not let President Obama do the Iran deal without submitting it to Congress. And I agreed with them. This is a big enough deal. You ought to submit it to Congress. But we ought to insist the same of President Trump on any deal that he might decide that was a good deal in North Korea.